Geringer?
Yeah.
Geringer?
First fail of the day, unmuting here, and
Thank you, ma'am.
Yet, but on the CCTA Authority Board.
Anderson?
I'm here, and I represent the Contra Costa County Board of Supervisors.
Thank you.
I believe that's why I'm here. I'm also on County Connection, and I'm also on SWAT and an alternate to CCTA, but I believe I'm here in my capacity representing the Board of Supervisors.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. And Anderson?
Okay, the ON, Anderson. I'm Charlie Anderson. I'm the general manager at WestCat.
Next, we have Dutra Roberts.
Green's not on the.
I am here, but I'm not a PAC member.
Toth?
Hi there, I'm here and I am the president and CEO of Choice in Aging, and was on, I don't know, Paratransit Coordinating Council for a couple million decades, and serve people with disabilities and frail elders. And oh, I want to say that Chelsea Velez on here is with Choice in Aging. She's brand new to the organization and I asked her to jump on to learn. So thank you.
Alan? Alan?
I don't see her.
Okay. Bremer?
Here.
Thank you.
I'm from ressuccess.org. We're a nonprofit serving adults with developmental disabilities, and I serve on the DD Council for Contra Costa and Alameda.
Krieg? Jeannie Krieg?
I don't see her.
Okay. Cunningham?
You have Steve Pond here.
Steve, okay, great.
John Cunningham, I'm a transportation planner with Contra Costa County, present.
Sullivan?
Sullivan here, and today I'm representing Contra Costa Health Services. But before I was an administrator in the Office of the Director for the Health Department, I was the executive for our Developmental Disabilities Council and a system-wide advocate. I've served on the PCC, not as many years as Debbie, but I was there for a while with Peter, Debbie, and I have my Deputy Logistics Section Chief here helping present. But other than that, happy to serve.
Thank you. Byers?
Now that,
Lori Byers?
Lori Byers is my scheduler, and she is probably just copied on this so she can make sure I show up. So I don't think
you for that. Hirsch?
Mike Hirsch, AC Transit. A few familiar faces, a few new ones. Hello, everybody. Happy to be on the committee.
Howell?
Hello, everyone. Here, my name is Nicole Howell, Executive Director for Ombudsman Services of Contra Costa, Solano, and Alameda, primarily advocating on behalf of those individuals who are living in long-term care.
Thank you. Ramazir? Rick? Or anyone from County Connection? Oh, Rashida, you're here. Are you here on behalf of?
I'm actually part of this meeting, I believe.
Okay, if you feel I should have called your name and have not, could you please indicate your presence by stating your last name?
Hi, this is Jeannie Krieg. Sorry, I was a little late with Tri-Delta Transit.
Thank you, Jeannie.
Knock her down 4 points.
I'll earn them back.
-4.
I will earn them back.
All right, I think that's it, right, Fifi?
Yes.
I think you all kind of explained who you represent, so if there's anybody that wants to say any more, you can. But before you do, I failed in my duty to say, due to the shelter in place and COVID-19, the Accessible Transportation Strategic Plan Policy Advisory Committee has chosen Zoom as its meeting platform. During the meeting, please mute your mic. If you haven't already done so, please mute your mic now. The Zoom meeting instructions are as follows. I will request any committee questions and comments on the agenda item. If you would like to speak, please physically raise your hand. Fifi or I will call upon you. Please unmute your mic. After you speak, please remute your mic. I will request any public comment. If anyone from the public attending the meeting wishes to speak during an agenda item, please raise your hand or press *9 if you are on the phone. Fifi or I will call upon you to speak and unmute your mic. You will have 3 minutes to speak. After 3 minutes, your mic will be automatically remuted and your hand will be lowered. If an action is required on an agenda item, there will be a call for the vote. Fifi will conduct a roll call vote. When Fifi calls upon you, unmute your mic, state your vote, and then remute your mic, although these are all information items today, so I don't think we will have an action item. Having done that, before we jump into the presentation, does anybody have anything they want to say? Otherwise, I'm going to turn this over to our consultants. Richard Weiner from Nelson Nygaard will be leading the meeting. I want to thank our project manager on this from Nelson Nygaard is Naomi Armenta. She will be presenting the presentation as we move along. So I believe this is my chance to, I have to do public comment. Is there anybody from the public that wishes to comment on anything that's not on today's agenda? Terry Ann, Fifi?
Peter, this is Terry Ann. I didn't receive any written public comment and I don't see anyone raising their hand on the Zoom meeting.
Okay, we'll close public comment and I will turn it over to Richard.
Great. Thanks very much, Peter. Yes, I'm Richard Weiner with Nelson Nygaard. I believe my role is principal in charge or something like that on this project, but I'm working very closely with Naomi. And we actually have backup just in case we have any Zoom challenges. Marvin Reynoldson is also on this call. But Naomi and I have set it up so that she's a co-host and she will be advancing the slides on the PowerPoint. So we've actually put a lot into preparing for this meeting. So we're really excited that the day is actually here. And this will be the first of 3 meetings with the Policy Advisory Committee. I'm hoping that most of you had a chance to look at the briefing packet, but I think I heard Rashida saying she hadn't had a chance. And I'm sure there are others on this call as well. So I'm not going to get into detail, but I do want to just give you a sense of the content of the packet so that you know what's in there. And towards the end, there is one part where I am going to read to you what's in the packet because it's very relevant to the real purpose of our meeting today. So I have a hard copy of this in front of me. Let me just restate what the meeting objectives are in the briefing packet that you received. Firstly, to educate you about the Accessible Transportation Strategic Plan and provide an update on activities to date. Discuss how current accessible transportation is structured, provide a history of previous studies and barriers to implementation, and prepare the Policy Advisory Committee for review of potential scenarios in the upcoming meeting, which we'll talk about when that's going to happen. I will say with all these bullets in mind, really what we're anticipating is that the bulk of the meeting will be talking about some of the previous studies and the fact that those were not, many of the recommendations are not implemented. And I think we all share a common objective of trying to figure out a way to get the recommendations that come out of this study implemented, just set them up for as much chance of success as possible. In the briefing packet, you'll find contact information for all the people on the call today. And the first thing I noticed when I opened this was Charlie's last name misspelled. So sorry about that, Charlie. That slipped through. But there's email addresses for people on the committees and on the Technical Advisory Committee and the team. And then there's a summary of the ATS plan purpose. We've got a listing of all the transportation. It's an inventory really of the transportation programs that are available for people in the county who are either people with disabilities, seniors, or veterans. And we're going to get into some of these in the upcoming slides. Then we have the schedule, the timeline for completion of the project. and some of the potential barriers in the implementation of coordinated transportation. We've got a list of the previous study efforts, and really the last page of this is where I am going to, when we get to it in the slideshow, talk about the role of public policy in transportation coordination and how politics can play a role, and sometimes not a positive role in getting these things implemented, and how these barriers can be addressed. With that, I'd like, Naomi, if you could go on to the next slide, please. So, as I mentioned, this isn't a very long slideshow, so we can get to the heart of the meeting towards the end of it. But the Accessible Transportation Strategic Plan examines transportation for the populations that I mentioned before: seniors, people with disabilities, and veterans. It's a partnership between CCTA and the county, and it's funded by Caltrans Sustainable Communities Transportation Planning Grant. We'll be recommending strategies to improve accessible transportation services, and the project is intended to be completed by early 2021, and I'll give you more detail when we get to the slide showing the timeline for each of the tasks. So what is the role of the Policy Advisory Committee? Primarily to provide input on addressing some of the policy barriers that will likely emerge, that we've seen before and that happen in other parts of the country and that have been surmounted in other parts of the country. To communicate with stakeholders about the study, to liaise or communicate with the elected officials or the boards that you are representing on this committee, and to help us review and prioritize the recommended strategies. Really a significant part. You know, for those of you who know us on this call, and we do know quite a few of you, the technical aspects of this we've done in many different contexts. Really, the political challenges are the ones that we want to really draw on you for making sure that we can flesh out these recommendations in a way that will ensure success. And finally, we'll be meeting with this PAC both in October and in January, and we'll talk about what we anticipate for the October meeting at the end of the slideshow. So just to give some background, there were really three impetuses, or if you will, justifications for doing this plan. The first one, and I need to minimize my screen. Great. So the first two are the Transportation Expenditure Plan from 2016 and 2020. And in the plan, it says CCTA will develop an accessible transportation strategic plan to implement a customer-focused, user-friendly, seamless coordinated system, which is what we're doing. Then in 2017, the county-wide transportation plan on a similar vein said, initiate the ATS plan, ensure services are delivered in a coordinated system. And then finally, MTC, the resolution 4321, and this is region-wide, says each county must establish or enhance mobility management programs to help provide equitable and effective access to transportation. So those, if you will, are the enabling pieces of or documentation that really are the basis for this study effort. The scope on a very high level is intended to study individual programs, look at options for a county-wide seamless system, and develop an implementation plan. Next slide, please. So this gives you a sense of the timeline. This is a much longer timeline to the left of the screen, but we decided we should just tell you what's happening from now on through the end of the study in February. So we're still in the data collection phase. We're having this Policy Advisory Committee meeting, as you can see in the blue, and other forms of virtual public engagement, which I'll tell you about in a minute. There's been very extensive public outreach in the context of COVID so far. Next month, we'll draft a final report, with local evaluation recommendations and county-wide preferred design. And we'll be drafting a public engagement memo, essentially documenting everything that we've learned so far, because public engagement really was an intrinsic part of this study. a critical piece of it. Then in October, we'll have another meeting with this committee, and we'll go into phase 2 of public engagement, which I'll talk about in some more detail. And basically in November, December, which is generally the time when it's hard to get people in one place, which is why we're hoping to complete our public engagement certainly before Thanksgiving, we'll be spending that time to prepare the final report and the implementation plan. And we'll finish the public engagement memo, and then the last couple of months, January, February, we'll go through the acceptance approval processes by the appropriate bodies, and we will be coming back to you for a third time in January. Next slide, please. So we've created a couple of maps to summarize some of the information. Obviously, behind all of this, there's quite a lot more information, but this map gives you a sense of not only some of the public transit agencies. You can see from the west moving east and south, AC Transit, East Bay Paratransit, County Connection Link, Tri-Delta, and County Connection Link as well in the south. So I think this is familiar to all of you, but what you may not all be familiar with are some of the programs on the side, 1 through 14. You can see some of the more local programs that are available. Some of them are very, actually I was going to identify a few, but I don't want to make it sound like we have any preference of here. So if you just read through that, you'll see there are quite a few local programs. And if you could look at this map and keep some of the geographic distribution in mind before going on to the next slide, you'll see. So here we've really just highlighted some of the key medical facilities, and including hospitals and dialysis clinics. But as you can see, these are very much concentrated along the 680 corridor. And so areas in West County, you know, as you can see, there's a real problem with people having access to medical facilities since the close of Doctors Hospital, I believe it was called, and East County as well. Of course, the density is much lower in East County, but nevertheless, both East and West are quite underserved in terms of the transportation options available. And I will, at the end of this section, I will ask you for comments. So I'll just go through this. Yeah, why don't we go? Are there any comments on those slides? I went through it quite quickly, but I wanted to, that was sort of the first item on the agenda. So I wanted to give you an opportunity for comments. And I think Peter, you or Fifi are going to call on people.
Do we have anybody? Debbie?
You said that with such enthusiasm, Peter.
Yeah.
I want to say that I am thrilled with what I'm hearing so far. Having been around the block a lot of times in this regard, we don't typically start off the conversations with how the effort that we're doing today is to ensure that we aren't leaving something behind, which we've done the last 3 times we've studied. And so I think that it's really important to sort of highlight, you were talking about the document that sort of lays the enabling words for what the work is that we're doing to be customer focused and user friendly coordinated system with mobility management. I think the primary point that we need to do for the purpose of this work is to put the writer at the center of what we design rather than designing what we want the writer to plug into. And I think that needs to be sort of the central focus of the work that's being done. So I wanted to appreciate you recognizing those 3 areas. I appreciate you recognizing the fact that we have decades worth of studies that we haven't implemented, and that this is going to be something that is transformational and does look at the need and the fact that transportation in this population is absolutely a measure of health and of public health and our public health. So thank you for all of that.
Thank you, Debbie. I think Dave had his hand.
Yeah, mine's more just a procedural. Terry Ann, want to let you know, Bill Churchill did log on at probably for Rick Ramazir's position.
Thank you. We'll note that.
Also along those lines, I just want to note that Drennan Shelton from MTC joined as well. She's not, I don't believe she's a PAC member, but she is obviously a very interested person and manages basically accessible transportation on a regional level, and is a good liaison to MTC for all of us.
Wanted to apologize for being late, and I am here for Rick. I just wanted to make sure that everybody was aware of that.
Thank you. It's been noted.
Any more questions on the first section? If you all have other services that you know of that maybe have fallen off of our radar, please let us know. We will add those to the list and engage with them. I noticed that there wasn't anything on the map from East County other than Tri-Delta Transit, but maybe they just have perfect coverage of the whole area. So congratulations, Tri-Delta Transit.
Peter, member is it Brimmer? Did you speak? Did you want to speak? I saw you waving your hand. Okay.
Thank you. I just thought I would like to piggyback on what Debbie said, in that we've been in business for 26 years, and we have had constant challenges with our transportation, and that our niche is to serve individuals with maladaptive behavioral challenges. And I think it would be really nice to add that on to this group's agenda, to be able to identify how to address those individuals and be able to ride them back and forth to their day services. Right now, we have people that are demitted from the bus. We have people that are on the bus for a very long time. And it's nice to hear that we're going to be looking at the person first, and then how to get them the needs met to get to program. That's all.
Nicole?
Just want to add to that list of services, Mobility Matters. They're a volunteer-driven ride program. I know that they're based in Central Contra Costa, but I think they may serve some other areas as well.
Yeah, I'm surprised we don't have.
Since they're countywide, I couldn't figure out how to map them, but we do have them down.
Josh?
Yeah, I just wanted to jump in. Thank you for the presentation so far. Just in regards to I guess the technical part of the development of the plan and our policy that we're going to be looking at, I just want to really emphasize the need to engage our end users and really collect on the end user experience across the board. This comes from a function of, timeliness, service coordination, health equity, and greater equity elements, as well as the need to provide a whole person, human-centered approach to the services that we offer in transportation. As we all know, transportation is an essential component to be able to live, work, and play within the scope of the lives that we want to choose. And in that regard, embracing innovation at all points possible. Peter, you know that, always about the tech and going forward with that. And then leaning in on current lessons being learned within the scope of the COVID activation. John Cunningham is actually my emergency function 1 manager within our logistics section unit. And perhaps John would like to actually speak up on this, but we really are, through the crucible here, actually demonstrating that the system can work without the traditional service barriers. In a large part, huge thanks to Rashida and Tri-Delta Transit, Steve and gang. And I'm going to mute now because my deputy section chief is chiming in.
Thanks, John. Any more comments or questions? We will get into the outreach that we've done to date, and we will also get into some of the barriers and issues. So the things you're bringing up right now, we are going to talk or speak to in this as part of this agenda, at least where we're at this point.
Peter, this is Charlie Anderson. I just had one quick question. So I noticed on the map that Kaiser Permanente, medical facility was not depicted in West County. And if there are corrections like that, or, questions about whether something should be on or off, how are those best directed?
You can send it to me and I'll update our lists and our maps. I would really appreciate it, everyone.
So you can either send it to me or directly to Nelson Nygaard. Either one, we'll make sure they get it if you send it to me.
Thank you.
Thanks, Charlie. Any more questions? Comments? All right, Richard, shall we move on to the next item?
Yes, please. And I was going to say, Josh's comment was a perfect segue to the next slide.
Although first, let me ask if there's any questions from the public, if there are any on this particular item. And we know a lot of the TAC members are on the call as well today, so.
I don't see any hands raised.
Okay, great.
Okay,
thank you.
Great. Thanks, Naomi. So, yeah, Josh asked the very pertinent question, and as you'll see, we've done a lot of outreach during these last few months. In fact, it was extended because of COVID factors. We couldn't do it in the amount of time that we had originally planned, so that's changed the schedule somewhat, but we felt it was critical that we get as much public input as possible, because ultimately we're going to need to have their support as well for the recommendations. So in the very short time before COVID happened, we did do, I believe Naomi did a couple of presentations to the Developmental Disabilities Council and also to the Pleasant Hill Commission on Aging. Once COVID set in.
Peter and them who did Pleasant Hill, Peter and John did that.
Oh, Peter and John, that's right. Thanks, Naomi. Yeah, keep me honest on any of these items. Surveys, we just, in the last week, broke the 1,000 survey mark. So we were very pleased about that. And the surveys are available in English, Spanish, and Mandarin. And we did very extensive outreach to try and get surveys out to people, including such moves as having them distributed by Meals on Wheels with the meal deliveries in areas where we saw there wasn't as good representation, because we were already partway through the survey and we were doing analysis on how many surveys per capita we were getting in different parts of the county. And so we put out flyers, and the surveys were emailed, and they was available on paper. Before I go on, I just want to mention that from the first 1,000, we have some initial findings. To those of you involved in this transportation issue, these probably won't be a big surprise, but essentially in terms of the modes that people reported using, the top 3 were driving, using BART, and being driven by family members. There was a significant number who used BART. I think we framed, and Naomi, correct me if I'm wrong, but we did ask people about their transportation behavior pre-COVID. Is that correct?
Yes. Well, I don't know that there's any verbiage on the survey that specifies that. We've tried to differentiate between them when we've done interviews or focus groups, though we've also really tried to collect information, sometimes in the other column or sort of the empty space question, about how things are for people now, because that is very important.
Yeah, okay, thanks. And generally speaking, in terms of customer satisfaction, the majority were excellent and satisfied for both fixed route and paratransit for all the agencies that we included. So that's all the agencies in the county, actually. The top trip purposes were medical and groceries. I should have mentioned at the beginning that the respondents majority were seniors. About 2/3 were 65 plus. Interestingly, 77% said that they were not certified for paratransit. So, and an overwhelming majority indicated that they used mobility aids other than wheelchairs. So to a large extent, this was a fairly active senior group. And some of the challenges that they faced are ones that we hear in every customer satisfaction survey, which is having service available at the times that they need it, and to the areas that they need to go to. What was interesting about this one is that safety was also identified as a significant issue for people. And the main problem, again, this is very common in these kinds of surveys, is on-time performance. We got quite a few comments from people about service being late. Now, again, that was maybe the majority of the comments we got, but the comments formed a minority of the respondents. So there may well be 90% on-time performance from the paratransit provider's perspective, but obviously for people, that was the issue that they were concerned about. And then we have been able to do some Zoom focus groups, which has been interesting and a new thing for us. Naomi did one with DVC students, and it was the San Ramon Senior Center, I believe.
Yes.
Yes, and I've done one with the El Cerrito Senior Center, but it drew on people from other locations in West County. And tomorrow I'm doing one with Lighthouse, with people with a range of visual abilities. So we've actually already done 4 focus groups, and we have a potential. Naomi, do you want to speak about potential ones, or should we rather wait until we're sure that we're having the others?
I think we'll wait. I'm not sure that they're far enough along. I feel confident about them.
Okay, good. But we've had 4 really good focus groups and gotten really substantive input. And we've also asked partners, people involved on the Technical Advisory Committee, and some of the people on this call to include information on their websites, and gone through social media, Instagram, Facebook, Nextdoor, and Twitter. So we've been quite pleased with the response that we've gotten. It's been pretty substantive input so far. Next slide, please.
Sorry, did you want to wait for comments on this first? This is its
Yeah,
own
sure.
project.
Let's do that. Yeah, let's do that.
Yeah. Okay.
So
Peter, you'll call on them.
Maybe I'll just jump in and say, so the survey, let me get my video on here. The survey itself was put together
Another slide.
prior to COVID. So we didn't have any direct questions regarding COVID on there because obviously we didn't know about COVID at the time. But we have in all of our follow-up, we have had questions associated with, the current status of how transportation is working as well as pre-COVID things. So we've also used our TAC very, very well on this, and we really appreciate the effort they put in for agencies that do care calls to their client just to make sure their clients are doing well in their shelter in place. We had a couple of the agencies that were willing to do it, ask them during their care calls about transportation issues they may be having or have had, and to help them fill in the surveys. And that's been very helpful in our outreach. So I feel real good under the circumstances, with COVID, that we've gotten as many responses back on the surveys as we've had. This was public outreach was very important, obviously, to Caltrans, who's paying for this survey, are paying for the study. And initially, we had planned on working with community-based organizations to go out and have meetings, and we provide food or whatever, stipends to help put those groups together. Well, obviously, we couldn't do those once COVID hit. But what we've come up with are these focus groups where we work with agencies or CBOs to put together these focus group Zoom meetings, and we pay a small stipend to the agency that can either use it for projects or programs, or give it to the people who are on the focus group for contributing. So it's up to them how they want to use it. So we've been trying to get creative with our outreach under the current circumstances and get as much input as we can. So Josh, it looks like you have a question.
Yeah, just a very quick general data geek question for Richard and the TAC folks that have been doing the surveys. Has the population threshold of survey responses grown to a size to where it's representative of the actual ridership as a whole?
So when you say the actual ridership, keep in mind we're trying to reach people who are not necessarily affiliated with all the programs, right? We want to reach people who are having difficulties with transportation. So I wouldn't say that we would try and get a representative sample. What we really were looking for is geographic diversity and disability diversity and language. And in that, we've been fairly successful, although the responses in Spanish and Mandarin have been fairly small. But, and certainly we've tried reaching people who use all the different modes. So to that extent, yeah, but it's not statistically significant when looking at the ridership of any of those.
And when we were in the process of working with the TAC on bringing in surveys, one of the things we did was compare the surveys by area to the density of population, because proportion of seniors and people with disabilities is actually surprisingly correspondent to general population. So we used that to help us determine if there were areas of the county where we were light on responses, and then we did some extra focus in those areas with those TAC members and getting input. So in some cases they were by focus group rather than actual survey.
Yeah, to that point, actually, Naomi's reminding me, for some reason, we've seen an underrepresentation in the Walnut Creek area. And so we're trying to make extra efforts to reach people there.
Dave Hudson had a comment?
Yeah, I want to say, Naomi, would you say that again? The density, can you just say that one more time? It kind of lost me.
Oh, sorry. I asked
An observation.
I asked my my map staff, my technical staff, when we were putting these surveys on the map by city or area. I think we did it by city. We originally just did it as an absolute number, but I said, the different parts of the county are populated very differently. Some of them are much less dense than others. So can we compare it to population? Because I didn't want to take the extra step of doing what you call actual data for seniors and people with disabilities. And I found in other work that they align pretty well with general population density. And so the staff informed me that the overall population was too big of a number, but using a term called density of population. So that still tells us what areas have a more dense population than others. And then comparing that to the number of surveys we received allowed us to get a sense, comparing number of surveys to population, basically how we were doing. So we're getting technical here, but we did our best.
No, my city, the last time I looked at an MTC report, shocked me to find out I had like the second highest density in the county. And I don't think I'm getting any lower density coming anytime soon. So what I was trying to get at is, what were you trying to tell me, that when you did a survey of my city, we would be, and then I went blank. We would what? If we got higher density where we're headed, this would do what to our transportation convenient that your survey showed?
Hey, Dave, can I sweet talk you out of your city?
No.
What city is that? No? Okay.
Oh, what city I'm in?
Yeah.
Where's my video here? Wait a minute.
We're seeing a waterfall.
Yeah, so I think the concept is that based on that the senior disabled populations within each area
Disabled,
are
okay.
the percentage of the overall population.
Okay, that's where I was going. What was the gist of what you're really trying to say?
Yeah.
Great. Other questions?
Ian, is your hand up or?
I'm actually sick and I'm lying in bed. It was just my hand over my hand over my pillow.
I wasn't sure if you were just moving your camera or if you wanted to make a comment. Wanted to make sure we got you if that was it.
Debbie talked me into being here.
Ian is sick and I made him come because he can't spread any germs on an online platform.
There you go. No, we appreciate you being here. Any more questions on the outreach, Rashida?
Yes, and I hate to sound like I'm re-asking the question in a different way, but did we use that same density methodology to send out the same amount of surveys? In other words, if you have higher density in a certain area, did you send out more surveys hoping to receive at least a percentage of that back so that what you did receive back truly represented the density?
Well, sending out.
Or did we just do a blanket spread of surveys?
Well, given our current scenario with needing to do things electronically, sending out was just kind of across the board to every location and person and organization we could find. And then what we used with our survey mapping was to figure out where we were light, where areas or cities that were lighter than the other parts of the county. And then we worked specifically with those TAC members to try and bump that up a little bit.
Did the methodology of sending out the surveys, for instance, did you have as many platforms to distribute your surveys with each city? Like for instance, besides social media, Instagram and Facebook, you mentioned earlier about, the Meals on Wheels and, all these different methodologies. In other words, as the agencies participated in this, did you find that they all had a website? Did you find that they all had a potential Meals on Wheels program? Did you find that they all had a pigeon that you could, strap it to their foot and it'll get there? Were the platforms equal to the distribution, do you think? Or did we find that the lack of platform for even distribution may contribute to the overall lack of knowledge for transportation services anyway?
I mean, that's a really interesting question about if it corresponds to a lack of knowledge. And I think there's a very good chance, just anecdotally, that we would find that. We definitely weren't able to initially distribute totally 100% evenly because certain jurisdictions were more involved than others. But we tried to do a number of sort of overlapping strategies, like our social media strategy, the next door, that went countywide, for the whole county. And we saw various sort of cross postings. So we were trying to basically come at it from as many different angles as possible to cover everybody.
And if I could just add to that, Rashida, I think one of the points I think you're making is, how do we reach the really hard to reach populations who aren't necessarily coming into senior centers and that sort of thing, which is why I'm not sure who had this brainwave, but I've not done this before. So I was really pleased we were able to go through Meals on Wheels because they absolutely reach people who otherwise would not be affiliated with organizations, don't come into a rec center or whatever. And what we did was, as Naomi mentioned, we sorted all our responses by location and then left out the top, whatever, 15, 20 that we knew we had good representation from, and then asked the person who oversees the Meals on Wheels program if there were sites, Meals on Wheels sites, or even volunteers who were going in those geographic areas, if she wouldn't mind putting in flyers. And then Peter drove 500 flyers over to their office, and so that she could put them in the volunteers' packages. And so that added to, so I think we feel pretty good about the representation.
I also want to shout out to Joanna Pollock from the TAC, who went in person to San Pablo Senior Center with clipboards and was giving people paper surveys. So we had some people who were hardcore.
I won't even take all the credit because it was actually the people working at the senior center. So it trickled down to them and they were translating and helping and standing in line with people in a relatively warm day for San Pablo, working through any questions they had. So all I did was drive over there and I get paid to do that.
We also had a number of people calling into our staff and we helped them enter surveys online, and also the check-in calls, particularly Mobility Matters and I think Choice in Aging. So those are all ways that we are very happy that we were able to get surveys from people who are not computer savvy.
Debbie, did you have a question?
Thank you.
I did. I just wanted to say my concern about the information that we pull in is the same here as my concern about the information that we put out in a time of COVID, is that there are populations that we miss. And Meals on Wheels, I love that. Like, this is so much better than what we did in 2013. So much better, right? Huge improvement. However, the folks that aren't getting rides and don't have access are on Bethel Island and they're not getting Meals on Wheels. The folks who have developmental disabilities and live with families out in the rural parts that are affordable don't have representation. Like, I feel like there are the people that we don't ever get to in some spaces are the people who don't have access and don't have knowledge about transportation. And so I just worry that we're missing a little bit of feedback from that outer space. And I wish that I had the answer to how to get it, because I don't feel like, I feel like we're trying to tackle this in some of the COVID rapid response task force work that's happening in terms of running algorithms on database of healthcare recipients in the county. But I feel like there's something that we're missing out there that we're not capturing for people who don't have access. I know that one of the gentlemen that was on the Paratransit Coordinating Council said because there wasn't fixed route service in Antioch on Sunday, he couldn't get to church. Those folks that, you know, this guy was on the Paratransit Coordinating Council. I don't think we solved for that problem even in all those years, but I think that there are folks that are in the fringe area that we're not necessarily capturing here. And I just want to highlight that.
Thank you, Debbie. Any more comments? Anybody from the public that wishes to speak or comment on this item? I don't see anybody. So Richard, you want to move on to the third item? Richard, did we lose you?
Is Richard on?
I don't see his name.
He might have gotten bumped off. He's been having his own internet issues as well. Well, until he comes on, should I get us started?
Yeah, why don't you get us started, Naomi?
Okay. The main reason we did want to talk to you today was about these challenges and opportunities that we have through this project. They were listed in your briefing packet as potential barriers, but we're trying to be positive. And as we've mentioned, there have been past studies done that have had varying levels of applicability. And this is a project and a set of problems that the county has been working on for quite a while, starting, making an effort with this 1990 plan, and also the CCTA Paratransit Improvement Study in 2004, and then the Contra Costa Mobility Management Plan in 2013. We have indicated to you before that mobility management is a hot topic, and the goal for much of the region. One of the other major challenges we face when we look at this project is the differences in missions between our different stakeholders. We have a variety of planning agencies involved and also transit agencies. And we have a number of very active community focused organizations. So lots of these organizations have different missions and different populations. We know there's overlap, but still there are some key differences. There are multiple regulatory requirements. When you look at, for instance, what can be funded with Measure J funding, what certain FTA grants are eligible for, such as 5310. And then there are multiple requirements on the transit agencies for ADA paratransit service. These, as I said, many of these requirements are linked to funding issues. Also, we have to be aware that there is no one organization or office or person that is responsible for the answer to the issues that we are facing. CCTA and the county don't necessarily have policy authority over operations. They can provide funding opportunities, they can provide some policy direction, and hopefully leadership. We know that the need for coordination, oh good, Richard's coming back in, is great, and the dysfunction is, and the overall system needs to be solved. Richard, are you on?
I am.
Okay, great. I've got us a little bit started on this item. I just kind of went over the items on this slide, but I am going to turn it back over to you now.
Great, thank you. I am not a friend of Comcast. We spent 2 hours on the phone with them this morning trying to expand our bandwidth, and here we are. Sorry about that. Yeah, I really think the key part to this slide is getting to our discussion about, so Naomi, you've mentioned some of the past studies and some of the challenges that have been faced in other contexts. But I thought it would be really helpful to just take 3 minutes to read to you from the briefing packet to put it in context, because I think it really gets to the heart of the matter, and we can use that as the basis for our discussion for the next 15, 20 minutes. And this is the second to last page. Assuming that the ATS plan is successful and sufficient leadership arises to pursue implementation, some of the barriers that could impact the success of the plan and coordination in Contra Costa County include the following: differing service priorities of different agencies, local influence and cost issues, lack of stable funding, need for building more permanent positive coordination relationships, failure to account for the effects of COVID-19, and regulatory factors imposed on individual agencies. And there's a very good quote that we put in here from a TCRP report, Transportation Research Project, I forget what the C is, National Transportation Study, in which they were looking at the kinds of barriers that other coordination efforts have faced. And we did feel in putting this meeting together, and in fact in taking on the study, that it was really important to be transparent about some of the challenges that have been faced, so that we can tackle them, as Debbie mentioned as well earlier on. And what it said was the best way to maximize the probability of successful coordination efforts is to fully understand coordination's potential achievements and potential pitfalls. Fundamentally, coordination is a fluid process involving working relationships among persons who come from different backgrounds and may have at least some differing objectives. Coordination needs to be understood and respected as a political process, one in which power and administrative responsibilities are shared, not controlled by one party or another. For coordinated relationships to survive and prosper, they need to have the continued support of key decision makers, and that's where you'll come in. They need to continue to demonstrate demonstrate real benefits to all parties involved and need to be relatively free from the influence of personal political agendas. And it continues. But we wanted to sort of lay that on the table and really have an open discussion about maybe some of the, we don't want to get stuck on just what didn't work.
Oh no.
This time around.
So maybe Richard can turn off his video and it uses less bandwidth and we can just hear you talking.
Yeah,
and that
you're
way it
kind of
won't be
freezing
glitchy.
up a little bit.
Oh, okay. Sorry. Did you hear any of that reading of that narrative?
Yes, but I think we need like the last 2 sentences repeated,
Okay.
what you want us to focus on next.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, so basically wanted to, I'll turn off my video as suggested, thank you. But what we really wanted to do is, be transparent about the kinds of issues that have been faced in the past, but not get stuck rehashing all the issues that there were. We want to talk about them in the context of how can we try and do things differently this time round? And are there just external factors which are more conducive to us being able to implement things this time round? And so we'd like to have sort of a free discussion about that. Any ideas? And I know a number of you have been involved in some of the previous efforts. So hopefully there were some lessons learned from previous times that you can share with us as we develop recommendations that have a better chance of being implemented. And I'll let Peter call on people who, Debbie looks like she's ready to go.
It does, doesn't it? Go ahead, Debbie.
Yes, Debbie's always ready. All right. So I would say that number one is that we do have a shared mission. So while we all have various different ways that we get to whatever it is that we do, we should agree that our shared mission is that the writer gets to go where they need to go, how they need to get there. I mean, I think it's a really, really basic principle that we can all agree that that's what our goal should be. And I think we have to come to that it is the writer that should be the point that we look at for what we need to build, what we need to do, and how we need to do it. And if we have that North Star, then the rest of it we can figure that out. That's one. Two is we need to have bold leadership that is willing to do the uncomfortable. And I mean uncomfortable. Clearly something is uncomfortable because we study it decade after decade after decade, and we keep coming up with the same results that say you should do X, 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 and X, and then that sits on the shelf and collects dust, and then we raise some more money, we do some more study, we come up with the same results, sits back on a shelf. So it's going to take leadership, it's going to take a combined effort to agree on what our North Point is, our North Star is the writer. And it's going to take recognizing that this is not your traditional fix. I have another point after this. This is not your traditional fix that we're going to put Band-Aids on pieces of it. This structurally needs to change. There needs to be management. There needs to be a single point where it is responsible. Richard, you pointed out that there is no single one entity. Well, there needs to be. There has to be somebody who's responsible for that. And it has to be that all the different funding streams don't prevent you from doing what needs to happen. Because that doesn't happen with bikes. It doesn't happen with the fourth bore on the Caldecott Tunnel. It doesn't happen with the trails in the parks. Like, we figure everything out except transportation for elders and people with disabilities. And that has to change. This has to be just like any other constituency, whether it's the people who want to save the environment and reduce single occupancy vehicles, or it's the people who want to spend less time commuting to get to work, or it's the people who want to ride their bikes over the mountains, or whatever the case may be. This constituency has to be treated in the same way. And the artificial barriers that we put up are excuses. We don't do it anywhere else. So I think that has to be the framework from which we start if we're going to be successful.
Great, thank you, Debbie. And I was actually reminded that we actually thought of doing this as a round robin, so that that's a really great start, and we want to make sure that everybody has a chance to weigh in. So maybe Peter, and obviously you can pass, or you may just want us to come back to you if you have other thoughts. But maybe Peter can go around the people as they appear on his gallery view and ask if they have any thoughts on the matter.
Well, my pictures, everybody keeps jumping around on my screen. So the best way to do this would just be initially, I think, Dave, do you have any comments right now? We'll just go real quick.
No, I think Debbie covered just about everything.
Okay, Jeannie, do you have anything?
I have nothing to add. I'm excited that we're doing this.
Great. Ian, anything to add or comments? I think you're on mute.
Unmute. All right, unmuted. I just want to reiterate that historically our barrier has been that our constituents, the adults with developmental disabilities that are suffering from maladaptive behavioral challenges, are a group of people that are being demitted from our current transportation systems, that are being denied other services because of the statement. But more importantly, what I want to add is that I think that as we're looking at all of this, I think training for the people that are driving these buses and that are the aides on these buses, they need to have extensive training on how to be able to meet the needs of our different populations. If a senior gets sick on the bus, what do you do? If a client that we serve, becomes frustrated and starts to hurt themselves, what do the staff do? We've offered repeatedly to the transportation companies to bring them in and to train them on how to work with our population, and we've gotten nowhere. There's no time, there's no money, there's no motivation. So I just think that as we look at all of this, to train the people that are going to serve the people that we serve.
Supervisor Anderson?
Yes, and I'm delighted we're having this conversation. I wholeheartedly support what Debbie said too, because she has been such a strong advocate for not just senior transportation, but our disabled population transportation, and thinking outside the box. And if there's one thing I've appreciated with COVID, it's something we've all had to do, and we're starting to realize that some of these barriers we have created artificially and really don't need to be there. You've got one of my favorite brilliant minds on this panel, and that's Rashida, who works with us on County Connection, who already working with Debbie had come up with a wonderful pilot program we're using right now in County Connection. So my goal really is to see this move forward. I would really want us to have a comprehensive countywide approach, but recognizing that there are many different ways that we can get there, and just being able to identify those and being flexible to accomplish those. And bottom line, I don't want to see this report ending up on the shelf again.
Amen.
Teresa?
Well, of course, Debbie and Supervisor Anderson summarized it well. I want to thank everybody for the background report and for the PowerPoint presentation. And I too want to be part of something that doesn't end up on the shelf and that builds on the challenges or barriers that we're identifying that caused the previous plans to not come forward. So I'm glad to be a part of this group and look forward to working with and getting to know all of you better.
Nicole?
Hello, thank you for the great presentation and policy briefing. I am doing my best to come up to speed. My question sort of is what would it take to truly revolutionize the system and get to where Debbie is describing? Like, without any conversation of like, we can't do that, like what would it take to build that system, or what is that system? And really, let's gain a deeper understanding of that. I noticed that in the policy briefing, there were some real acknowledgements that we've had great plans in the past, but as noted previously, they have sat on the shelf. And I'm sort of wondering what were the institutional issues that prevented us from taking action on those, because it does seem like there was some shared agreement around a single agency. And I would just ask for some really frank conversation about what about us or our organizations or our structures prevented that from happening.
Thank you. That's very helpful.
Rashida, we'll come back to you. I want to get through the PAC members first, and then we'll go back. Josh?
Nothing further at the moment. Thank you.
Okay. Charlie Anderson?
Yeah, thank you. So I think that, we have a really excellent group of people here, a lot of great minds and a lot of good technical resources to draw on. I mean, I think that one of the things that's been a problem in the past is sort of a general statement of a problem and not a specific thing. And I think that to the extent that we can put problems out and as a group kind of come up with solutions to them, we avoid kind of jumping to the big solution that there may not be buy-in on. So I think that, keeping it grounded, keeping it specific, get the input from the users about specific things that need to be resolved to improve their experience, I think will be on a much better footing.
Okay, thanks, Charlie. Bill? Bill, are you still there?
Yeah, sorry, I was trying to unmute.
Oh.
Thanks, Peter. Thank you for the presentation. I thought it was excellent. It is thought-provoking, and it's very thought-provoking when you look back at the history that there have been multiple studies done in the past. One thing I can say is, at least my recent experience in working with the various operators within Contra Costa County, there has been a very strongly renewed sense of working together, being creative, doing new things. Some of Rashida's work with Debbie is an example of that. I think a partnership between Tri-Delta, County Connection, and WestCat in dealing with COVID moves is another example. This one-seat regional ride, and there's a solid consensus behind that as well, and even beyond the county. So there has been some, I think, profound movement and creativity put into this even before this whole project is completely formed. So I have great hope. I think that we are going in the right direction, and I think there, as Charlie put it, a lot of good minds behind it. That's it.
Thanks, Bill. Rashida?
I keep forgetting I'm with the TAC, not with the PAC.
Okay.
So Bill already said what he needs to say as the PAC representative. So as the TAC representative in all of this, I wanted to piggyback the concern that I have. I think that the presentation was great. And I think the fact that there's renewed zeal in getting this taken care of, I feel very privileged to be a part of this. But the concerns that I have are that governmental funding, governmental rules and regulations, FTA rules and regulations on how fundings are used and distributed lend to some of the potential previous problems that prevented us from moving forward on some of these. So as we do this collective great job of doing it, I feel that it'll be up to these groups of individuals as they reach up, and Debbie's pretty good at reaching out to senators and people in governmental places. But when we talk about the FTA and the DOJ and all those places and how our fundings are managed, making sure that they hear these so that it's not more about doing the minimal work, but it's about looking at the person. Because we have all these this is what we're qualified to do minimally. And just giving somebody just, minimal options doesn't work. If you have the choice, you don't have a minimal option, you have what works for you. It's smart and it lends to your life and it works for you. So some of these regulations that we deal with, kind of lend to, what's the least we can do to kind of make it happen and make us compliant. We want to be more than just being compliant. We want our individuals to thrive. So I guess I'm speaking to this particular group that is not just you guys getting together and working down so that we can actually make it happen, but it's also about working it up so that, we don't have the restraints that we normally have that prevent us from making a good idea come to reality. And I'll stop on that.
Thanks, Rashida. We've got a few more non-PAC members that are on the line that have really worked hard in accessible transportation. I thought it would be good just to hear if they have any questions or comments. Drennan from MTC, do you have anything you want to add?
Hi all. No, I'm here for the conversation and anything you need from MTC. So I'm just joining in.
Thank you.
Well, anything we need from MTC, is somebody taking notes? Somebody's taking notes. Somebody's taking notes.
I knew I wasn't the only one that caught that.
I'll tell you, if you don't know Drennan, she's a champ over at MTC. So Vi, do you have anything you want to add? Vi Ibarra?
Yes, thank you. So I'm with the Developmental Disabilities Council for Contra Costa County and also serve on the TAC. And I think that my comments are very similar to what Rashida just recently stated very well around, the view of governmental rules and regulations and versus what Debbie had said early on, which is we're all here because we want riders to get where they need to be, when they want to be there, in the way they need to get there. And the way Debbie had presented that statement was sort of like we all agree on that. We're all working towards that. And I wonder if then we throw in some governmental rules and regulations, and if that really puts a wrench in those works. Like, can we be doing both of those things really? So are we trying to very neatly follow the rules and make sure that we're doing all these minimal responsibilities and requirements that we're supposed to be doing and doing them very well? Or are we trying to make sure people are getting where they want to be, when they want to be there, in the way that they need to do that? So I appreciate the rider focus and keeping that in mind and thinking when there is a hurdle or a problem or a challenge, what does it mean to this rider? What do we need to do to make this trip accessible for this rider? And I think that as much as we can keep a focus on individual riders, I think that will support working through those hurdles, figuring out ways around or under whatever those hurdles may be. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Vi. Rob Thompson, Westcat.
I don't think I have anything else to add. Thanks, Peter.
Okay, thanks, Rob. Joanna, WICTAC.
Let me unmute. Sorry. So, we're kind of a microcosm in West County of what the bigger county is. We're trying to coordinate 4 programs, 2 sources of money. Well, actually, I don't want to say 4 programs. Maybe it's more like 6. Anyway, I have a decade of trying to coordinate. We've gotten better. But I think what John Cunningham said a while ago, politics, 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 and I'll leave it at that.
Great. Steve, I think I missed you. Steve Pont.
Yep, nothing for me. Everybody's pretty much said everything that needs to be said. Thank you.
Okay. John Cunningham.
Yeah, I think I should probably give some context on the quote that Joanna threw out. That quote is from the study that Richard Weiner mentioned earlier, the Transportation Cooperative Research Program, and they had a section under barriers of implementation, and that section was entitled exactly that: politics, politics, politics. The only other thing I had to add is this is a great dialogue. I've been working on this in the county for about 20 years. This is the first time we've had this level of engagement and this diversity of players. So this in and of itself is groundbreaking. Thank you.
Thanks, John. Chelsea Velez. I don't know if you want to say anything? Debbie won't mind.
Oh, I am just here to learn. So
Okay.
it has
You're
been,
learning a lot, I bet.
thank you guys.
I will just add my 2 cents worth, as well as the government regulations and the regulatory issues that surround everybody that provides these services, is the lack of reliable and consistent funding. It's very difficult to fund operating programs, and that's what these are. You know, you put a vehicle on the street and it costs money every year, and it needs to be reliable. And if you've got, you know, sales tax that goes up and down, and, you know, things like COVID come in and really send our economy into a spin, it can really hurt our ability to deliver these services, especially when they're needed. So that's another thing that I think we need to keep in mind. And Dave, you had your hand up, or were you just agreeing
Yeah,
with me?
no, I did put my hand up because I think everybody's touched on just about everything that is the direction you'd like to go, or the problems as we see them. And I'm trying to find that one thing that you could point to start working towards, that might be getting through barriers. And to me, if I had to pick one thing after today's discussion, I would go back to what Ian was saying about training drivers. And I would say, if you're going to train drivers, you're probably starting down the wrong road, unless you're training drivers how to handle driving when these things come up. Right now, healthcare, health issues is front and center in the public's mind. And the driver's job is to drive. They make probably the least money of everybody that's dealing out there. And if you're going to start training them, they're going to be making as much as BART drivers by the time we're through. It just, I see a starting point flaw if we go after it that way. And I would like to see in the October meeting, not to get in, I'm not trying to get on Ian's bad side, but some kind of, these are things we could go towards. These are things that probably stop us because of the big M, money. And that's what I'm taking out of this meeting. If we really want to move ahead, we're going to have to find priority 1, 2, and 3 and really start working towards it.
If I could, I agree completely that the driver needs to drive the vehicle. I talk more about the aides that are on the bus that are not trained how to be able to serve our population. And therefore, the answer that we currently have is that the person is demitted from that form of transportation. And as Debbie and some of the other themes that we were talking about, is that it should be the person. How do we get the person where they need to be when they need to be there? And I say that from my perspective, regardless of disability, they should be able to have access to safe, reliable transportation. And so I'm relatively new to this group, and just throwing out the things that are of concern to our organization. But I'm definitely on board of identifying problem 1, 2, and 3, and then maybe my problem is 5, 6, or 7. But I definitely, with the money part of it, we offered to train the staff without any cost. We offered it to be that they would come and they would spend a half a day, they would meet the people that we serve, they would see our behavior plans, they would see what it is that we had, so that the transportation company was being included in the individual service plan, was being included in how to de-escalate a situation. And in my opinion, that makes for more successful rides, more successful customers, and all the way around. It's just, that's the problem that we face the most at our agency. That's all.
I agree.
I think Debbie beat you to the punch, Jeannie. So Debbie Toth and Jeannie.
But you should let Jeannie go, because I've been talking a lot. Go ahead, Jeannie, and I'll follow you.
All I wanted to say is that all sounds so great. and so perfect, but we have to keep in mind the reality there are union agreements in place, and sometimes what is right isn't possible under the existing collective bargaining agreements. And so that has to be a part of this. We have to include the labor piece of whatever direction we go.
So now I'll go. That was so I would say that that's a perfect segue into the refocusing us back on what the whole thing is, right? There's a person at the center of this that we're building a system for, rather than trying to fit their needs into an existing system. And so how do we get back to that recommendation that's the sewn thread throughout, that you have one agency that's responsible for that, and then you work with the external constituencies so that they can do what they can do within that system, and that there are enough different players and pieces of it that together we have a system that's going to meet the need at some point in some place. So it's this system and infrastructural change that has to happen in order for us to be able to do this. And then there has to be coordination, and there has to be an acknowledgement that there are funding streams that are for that. And there are union agreements and bargainings that happen, and that's okay. Like, all of these things exist. It doesn't mean we can't sew together a quilt that works for everybody who needs to utilize the service. And I think that's the point that we need to get to. And I don't think that saying that there's no money is the answer, because we don't say that there's no money when it comes to arresting drunk drivers who've killed children. We don't say there's no money when it comes to building a fourth bore in the Caldecott Tunnel. We find ways to fund that. So recognizing that there isn't an existing funding stream is one thing, but saying we can't do it because there isn't one is another argument altogether. So I would just, I'm going to keep pushing, and I'm sorry, I don't mean to make people uncomfortable, but I think that we need to do something different this time.
Peter, do you think, just in the interest of time, I could maybe wrap this up, and then we'll just have a few minutes left? I just want to point on a couple of themes that I heard from this discussion, and thank you everybody for your really substantive input. One, I'll start off with the positive, what Bill was saying, that in contrast to the previous times that this was looked at, there does seem to be more collaboration between the agencies. That was already happening pre-COVID, but certainly now with COVID, there's more of that happening. And so that's really encouraging. It may have been true last time around as well, but whatever it is, that is at least a trend in the right direction. And I've heard from various people about the need to have the rider as the central point, the starting point. The one thing that I'm hearing, and if we would have had more time, I would have liked to have heard more about what happened last time from those of you who are involved, is the potential barriers presented by federal either regulations or funding constraints and that sort of thing. And if I would have carried on reading that quote, that what they said was, not focusing on lack of additional resources, but on inefficiencies in the way those resources are used, especially given the current fiscal crisis that we're in. So I think, maybe working with, firstly, hearing from those of you who were involved, it could be, offline, it could be a one-on-one interview about how some of those constraints with regulations played out, but also working closely with Drennan, whom I look to as being like the one who knows everything that one needs to know about these regulations, is actually going to be critical.
Call her the guru. She is the guru.
Yeah. I mean, Drennan will be able to help us
set up, Drennan.
figure out which regulations could have been barriers in the past, which ones have changed. Things have changed dramatically, and how we can address those issues and be realistic about what can and what cannot be addressed. So I just want to leave you with those thoughts. We're a little bit beyond time, and I want to make sure that we end on time. So thank you everyone for that discussion. Naomi, if you could bring back the last slide. Oh, okay. Well, I think there was one more slide just before that in which we talked about what's going to happen in phase 2, which is where we'll actually be coming back to you. And maybe, Peter, you were going to talk about this, but in the second round of public engagement, we're going to give stakeholders an opportunity to review the recommended scenarios that we're going to come up with And we're going to draw on all that very extensive distribution list that we have. And we had asked people, if you're interested in staying involved, let us know. So we've been building up a database of people who are interested, not just agencies, but members of the public. And we plan on having a telephone town hall. So with that, Naomi will have up the last slide with our contact information if you'd like to get in touch with us. And if you don't have a pen and paper, you all know how to find Peter or John or Corinne. You
We're
can
going
ask
to
them.
send this out, I believe, as well, this PowerPoint.
Okay, great.
deck.
Great.
Yep,
Okay.
We'll make the PowerPoint available to everybody. So we'll be setting up the next meeting for October. We don't have a date yet. We need to talk to Nelson Nygaard, let them kind of ingest what they heard here today and then start continuing with their recommendations. We definitely want to bring you some recommendations and some things that they're looking at and providing information on for the October meeting. So based on that, is there any final comments, any final questions? I don't see any. Thank you all. Oh, Drennan, did you have something? Oh, okay. Thank you all so much for your time on this. This was a great discussion and very helpful to staff, and we look forward to meeting next time. Thank you very much. We're adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.